Hello everyone, and welcome to this next video where we're going to be talking about the final stage of the PACE model, which is the extension phase. We're going to be talking about how to set up extension activities so that students see the grammar in context. So we've worked really hard at them noticing it and co-constructing it, and now I want them figuring out, all right, how does this grammar point actually help me communicate things in the world? Quick review, we've seen what the PACE model is. It's a method for grammar instruction that's kind of discovery based, not necessarily implicit, not necessarily explicit, in the middle. So we've seen in videos how we've been setting things up with a presentation phase where we look at a particular resource, whether it's teacher written or whether it is an authentic resource. And we've done interpretive activities to help them identify the main idea, some supporting details, and just comprehend meaning before anything else. Then we move into the attention phase, where we have learners taking a look at the forms now. So we had them really focusing on meaning. Now let's look at what the forms actually are. So I drew their attention by bolding or color coding words so that I had them looking at specific things. That led me to being able to do co-construction, where I dialogued with my students, being able to talk about what is this grammar point, what do you notice about this, how do we form it, when do we use it, and getting that back and forth so that they kind of put everything together and they're doing the bulk of the work. Now we're going to talk about the extension phase, what that means in terms of how we just worked really hard with this grammar, and now we're going to bring it back to the theme of what we're working in. So the extension phase, by this point, like I said, you've presented it, you've drawn their attention to it, and you've co-constructed it. And now it's kind of that big moment of they need to see that this tense does not just exist in this resource. And this tense is also not just because you're telling them to use it, it's because they actually have a need to use it. They have a want to use it. They're going to use this to communicate different ideas in real life settings. So this is where you kind of bring everything together. And it can sound overwhelming to do that, but at the same time, it's a really powerful way to make sure that your grammar actually is in the context of what you're working with. So you're going to look at your topic or your theme. You're going to bring everything back to that. You're going to bring that grammar point there and make sure your grammar point supports that topic or theme, and that it also supports your communicative goals. So if your goal is to tell a story in the future about what life will be like and predict things, you want to make sure that that's your goal, that's your grammar, and how it relates to your theme or your topic. You also are going to have content goals. That could be your vocabulary that you really want to work with. That could be intercultural competence that you want to be building at this point, those sorts of things. So those are content things that you're bringing in as well. So that's really important that you're kind of making sure you're making meaningful opportunities to make everything work. So let's talk about choosing those activities that actually work. So like I said, I'm going to keep repeating this. Your students need to see that this grammar is so that you can communicate. This grammar exists for a purpose, okay? So what you're going to do is you're going to choose a series of activities that help you promote that goal. I advocate that you should choose a series of activities that are in all three modes. That's interpretive, interpersonal, and presentational. So interpretive being your listening and your reading, your interpersonal being your speaking or writing with somebody negotiating meaning, going back and forth, right? And your presentational is more your writing and your speaking when you're speaking to an audience or writing to an audience, okay? So I think it's really important that you show all three modes and how everything is going to be related. I'm going to show several examples of what I had done with one of my Spanish 3 classes in terms of how I set this up for everything, okay? So the really big thing is we've spent several classes now going through the PACE model where we looked at a resource and then we drew our attention to it, we co-constructed it. I'm not going to jump into super complex practice at this point. I'm not going to have them doing really difficult things with language because this is still a new structure to them. This is still new grammar to them. So I'm going to start simple and then I'm going to move outward while still providing supports. And I'm going to show you how I set that up as well. So this is kind of my model. So I usually start out after the PACE model, I go right into another interpretive resource. And then that kind of builds into an interpersonal task, and that builds into a presentational task. All of that is going to be in what I call a subtopic. So whatever my overall theme is, here's one subdivision of it so that I can use that related to the theme and also use the grammar to support all three modes. At this point, my tasks that I'm going to choose are going to be more practice-based so that learners can actually practice incorporating the grammar into their tasks, right? So I'm choosing simpler things to do. Then I go into a second phase where I do, again, interpretive, interpersonal, presentational. And you can argue that you can do presentational before interpersonal. That's totally fine. to go back and forth depending on what your goals actually are. Here I'm picking a separate subtopic related to my theme, again, making sure that my grammar point is actually needed to do those goals. So at this point, I'm going to start to choose tasks that are a little bit more complex, and I'm going to allow learners to start to create with language. So that phrase should sound familiar, especially if you've done MOPI training, where you know that creating with language, once you hit that novice high and further on, that's kind of the definition of being in that intermediate range and getting you up to the advanced range. It's really important to provide opportunities for them to create with language. And then I'm going to do one more. I tend to do blocks of 9. You could do less if your grammar point is kind of simple or if your students are grasping it really quickly. You could also do more if you feel like you need to do more practice with your students. Again, this will be subtopic number 3 related to my theme and my grammar. Notice here, so my tasks are going to be what I call tiered tasks, and Leslie Grant does an excellent job explaining this. So with this, I know that once I get to like stage 7, I kind of have an idea that there are going to be learners who need some really guided practice with this, who are still really struggling with the present perfect or the subjunctive or whatever it is I'm working with. So I want to provide tasks that are cognitively challenging to them, but also providing those supports for them. I also know that I have a good group of learners that are still at that creating with language stage, where they're still, all right, we're going to keep trying with this, we're going to keep working with this, we're going to keep incorporating it in there, and that's okay. I want to provide them with those cognitively challenging tasks and also provide them with the new material and chance for them to create with language. But then I also have that subset of learners who are like, Senor, I get this. Like, I don't need to keep practicing with this, right? So I want to make sure that I'm providing them with a challenge as well. So this last stage is like, there's a lot of tiered leveling to it, but it's really, really cool when it all comes together. So let me show you what this looks like. I feel like we can talk about it for ages, but if you don't see examples, it kind of makes it a little more abstract. So my Spanish 3 class, our goal is intermediate mid. It's a high intermediate high, strong intermediate mid, heading towards that high range. And so we looked at the present perfect. We did a bunch of tweets and a teacher-made presentation where they co-constructed present perfect. So under the healthy living umbrella, I'm looking at food as my first subtopic. So first I did an interpretive task where they read about the Mediterranean diet, summarized the main parts of the diet, and used the information to create a menu for someone following that plan. Not using the present perfect here because it's more content-based. I want them understanding the Mediterranean diet. Then I do an interpersonal task. So you're going to create a survey for your classmates to find out who has followed the Mediterranean diet recently and who has not. So here we're making guided questions for them so they can ask each other, have you used olive oil in your cooking? Have you eaten dinner with your family recently? Have you exercised recently? Have you eaten more fish in the past couple of days, right? So it's very, very guided in the sense of like how to set up the present perfect. They're learning things about each other, but it's not just going to stop at asking the questions. Then they're going to sort people into, you are following the Mediterranean diet for the most part, you are not, those sorts of things. Then I ended with a presentational task. So this was over a series of probably about a week. And I had them do a journal entry talking about what have you eaten recently and how has it affected your mental or physical health. So saying things like, recently I've eaten a lot of junk food and I haven't felt very energetic. Or recently I've eaten a lot more fruit and I've noticed that I'm able to sleep better, those sorts of things. So notice that these are simpler tasks for an intermediate mid-class where they're practicing and incorporating that grammar into their tasks. So now let's look at the second week. So I went on to a separate subtopic of school and stress, which they love to talk about. So we did an interpretive task looking at schedules from Guatemala and Colombia, doing some true or false interpretive tasks with those, and a Venn diagram comparing their school schedule to their school schedules. Then I went on to an interpersonal task. So I had them do chat stations, which I love, where I put them in groups of 4 around the room, and I have different pieces of paper at each one that might have some supports or some questions or some pictures. For this one, it had different parts of the school, so things like homework, particular classes, assessments, friends, the cafeteria, whatever it was. And so I had them having 5-minute conversations with their group, talking about how different aspects of the high school have affected their health, why it has affected their health, and any solutions they might have. So here I'm letting them create with language because I'm using the present perfect, but letting them kind of go off about whatever they want to talk about. From the presentational standpoint, then we went into this task where the school was up for accreditation. You're writing a letter to the committee talking about how the high school has affected your physical or mental health, which was rather entertaining to see their points of view on things. It was actually really eye-opening. And so they're creating with language here as well. because I let them kind of talk about how it has affected their health. Okay, so notice that it's getting a little bit more complex, and they're incorporating this new grammar into these more complex tasks. Then we went on to week 3, which was subtopic 3, where we talked about technology's impact on health. And so it's a more complex topic. So here's where I start to tier. So in my interpretive task, person A is going to read a short article on the pros of technology in people's health, and person B, they're reading about the cons. Both are going to fill out a graphic organizer. I tell them person A, person B based on their partner, and person A, their text is like an on level, right? So that's going to be for those that are on level in terms of their reading, and then person B's is a little bit more for the advanced reader, just because of the way it was set up. That person B's part of the article is a little bit more difficult. So I set it up so that those kids that are kind of excelling and those kids that need the challenge, I'm going to now give them that opportunity to be challenged in the interpretive mode. But just because they're reading different things doesn't mean that they all can't complete the interpersonal task, which was a 10-minute debate. The question was, has technology helped or hurt society? Provide personal examples, explain why and how. So saying like, I have used this for my homework, saying things like, I've spent a lot more time on my phone and I haven't slept enough, right? So they're using their articles to kind of defend their point of view. So person A says it helps, person B says it doesn't help, those sorts of things, okay? And then the presentational task is where I do what's called a tiered writing task, where I have one writing task, but it's set up at different levels so that person A might have, some sentence starters or some supports. Person B is going to have a question that is like the on-level question. Person C might have a really more challenging task that has them do the same things, use the present perfect, but in a more complex way. And I can show examples of those if people are interested as well. So notice here, this is where I'm tiering, right? So I'm providing support to those that need guided practice. I'm providing support to those that are still at the create with language stage, and I'm providing support to those that want a challenge as well. That all led us up to being able to do the summative performance assessment, which was reading a post from somebody online and responding to it. So writing a polite message to the person. So it's using the present perfect. It's going to incorporate the food topic, the school and stress topic, and it's going to incorporate the technology topic. Some general advice to end this. So you're going to choose activities that you know and you think will work to promote communication in your theme, okay? Make sure your learners actually need to use the grammar. If you're creating activities and they don't need the grammar, you'll be the first to know because you won't hear that grammar anywhere in there, which means you know you have to adjust your tasks. Or maybe you might have to adjust what grammar you're presenting next year at that point. And you're going to build your learners out to being able to do that performance assessment, backwards design. Set up your activities so that they can do that performance assessment. Every single day is building them up to be able to do that thing so that they can leave and feel successful.